This video is part of the Card Crafters Collaborative. Myself and 4 other amazing artists are going to be sharing some holiday inspiration with you. I'm going to be sharing how I used the Emboss It pen to add details to my Christmas card, along with gold embossing powder and some embossing glaze. Hey everyone, it's Joy here. Thanks so much for stopping by and watching. I have die cut some greenery. It's actually the winter greenery from Honeybee Stamps. They're Lovely Layers winter greenery. I die cut that from white cardstock, and I'm just going to do my ink blending. We've got some holly berries and holly leaves here. The berries are ink blended with Lumberjack Plaid. My leaves here are going to be ink blended with Rustic Wilderness. They're all Distress Oxide inks, and I'm using a small detail blender brush for my leaves. I want them to have a little bit of darker areas and lighter areas, so I'm going darker around the edge and keeping it lighter in the center. So for me, using this small detail brush is easier because it is so tiny, and then these images are not super big, so it just makes it easier to do it this way. Then I have some other greenery here that I am going to be ink blending using peeled paint, and because these leaves are so tiny, I'm going to go darker on the inside and then lighter towards the tips of the leaves. And so I have a couple of these, really quick and easy to ink blend, especially when you keep it in the cardstock, and then you don't bend up any of your edges. So that's been working out really nice. I've been doing that a lot lately, and I don't lose my die cuts. And although when I'm done, I do put them in my sort and stack trays from scrapbook.com, but I'm able to not bend my cardstock on these smaller pieces. Then on an A2 size piece of cardstock, I'm going to ink blend the background. I do have my mint tape. I taped off a section towards the top. I started with Lumberjack Plaid, and then I'm also using aged Mahogany. I wanted to deepen the Lumberjack Plaid just a little bit, so that's why I used both of those colors together. Then I'm using some anti-static powder because we are going to be using the Emboss It pen. If you've never used this before, you can use this to add your own designs, add details, which is what we're going to do here. So I have my ruler straight next to the line that my tape is making, and I have a little opening there, and I'm just coloring it with my Emboss It pen, and then I can sprinkle on my embossing powder. So it's just like embossing ink that you get in an ink pad, but in a pen form. So imagine all the things that you can do with it. And I'm going to show you a few different things that you can do with this. I'm going to clean up that line a little bit. So I want this nice line at the top edge where my ink blending was. So I had not removed my tape yet. Now I also brought my ruler in, and after the first line, I thought, no, I am just going to freehand this. So I'm going to freehand some lines at different lengths. And at the bottom of the lines, I'm just adding some dots, like 3 dots. My inspiration for this is Christmas balls. So when you see some of them and they have these fun lines and dots coming down and it's in glitter, it's very shiny, that's what I'm going for here. So once we get the embossing powder on, you guys will kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to add some more detail to it, but I want to get my first layer on so I can really see what I'm working with. So right now it doesn't look super fancy, but hang on. But how fun is that you can literally draw your own things? You could, especially if you are a really good artist drawing, I am not. Imagine all the things you could do and then emboss it. You could make it customized with somebody's name if you have really beautiful handwriting, and then you could heat emboss it, or using embossing glaze, which we're also going to use with this pen. Now I'm adding some dots, just 3 dots here and there, 2 dots here and there between all of those lines. And then I'm also going to create just little stars at the bottom. But let me get this on here. It's good to get your powder on even if you're not going to heat it up yet, because then your ink won't dry. And I will say I think the ink dries quicker with a pen than it does with an ink pad. So I would say move a little bit quicker. I have a few spots that the embossing powder is sticking to that I don't want, so I'm just going to take my paintbrush and brush that off. Now I'm going to heat this up, and then I can add my final detail. But how pretty is that? So just at the bottom of a few of these lines and dots that are coming down, I'm going to draw some just little quick sparkly stars, not like an actual star. And you guys will see that here in just a minute. But what a fun background. I love how this turned out, and I love that it was free-handed because it really does remind me of those decorative Christmas balls that you put on your tree that kind of have stuff like that. So let's heat that up, not ink blend that. That doesn't even make sense. And then we have that final background design. So on my leaves, there is some embossed areas. I'm going to highlight those embossed areas with that pen. I'm sprinkling on my gold embossing powder as I go, again, so it doesn't dry. But I'm just following along those embossed veins in the leaves. Then for the other two leaves, there is some other embossed areas. They're a lot smaller. I'm just going to follow along that. We're going to give these leaves some beautiful gold detail. So I'm going to do that for both of those. Sprinkle on my embossing powder. I just have it on a scratched piece of paper so that way I can dump it back into my container when I'm all done. And then I'm just going to use my reverse tweezers to hold that in place while I heat this up. But look at how pretty that gold is. Obviously you could do any color that you wanted, and that would be, you know, so think about all the different ways and all the different color schemes that you could use for adding some detail like this. Then I'm going to use my sentiment from the Honeybee Stamps Let It Snow stamp set. I like this sentiment. I'm going to heat it up with gold embossing powder. I did use my Versamark clear embossing ink to stamp this up, but we're going to use the embossing pen on it because the sentiment part that says in the magic is open. Now I'm going to heat this up until it's melted. Now you do have to be careful if you overheat your embossing powder. So when I add the pen to the open detail in that sentiment, we're going to bring in Lumberjack Plaid embossing glaze to that. I just thought that would be such a pretty way to add color to this, but I'm going to be really careful. I want to make sure my heat gun is nice and hot, so it's been on this whole time. And that way it can melt that embossing glaze really quickly without overheating my embossing powder. You could do this first and then do your embossing glaze after by stamping your image first with just a regular ink, coloring that in, and then stamping it again and embossing it with gold embossing powder. I used my coordinating die to die cut that out. I'm using the embossing pen to add a little dot detail to each of those berries and use that Lumberjack Plaid embossing glaze. So the little spot on the berries that has an embossed area, that's where I put that little dot. Or you could do gold, but I thought it would be fun to do the red embossing glaze. Let's start gluing things in place. I do have some foam adhesive behind my sentiment. I have the In the Magic lined up directly on that line that we created with the ink blending and embossing powder. I'm gluing down my two larger leaves with just some liquid glue, and then the other three leaves I am going to pop up with some foam adhesive. And if you guys like what you're watching, can you thumbs up that video? Comment below. Let me know what you thought of these techniques using the Emboss It pen. Let me know if you've ever used it or if that's something you think you might use, and leave that in the comment. And when you're watching the videos from the other card makers, you know, give them a comment to let them know what you think of their projects. I'm going to add these berries. I got 3 different sizes. Then I'm going to finish this off with some gold sequins from Spellbinders. I love that it has different sizes. I think there's 3 different sizes in this. That's a huge sell for me when it has different sizes of sequins or gems or whatever it is. I love that. So I'm going to put a few of those around. I'm just using my Pick Pro tool, which I love because it grabs things nicely. I'm going to change out one of those sizes, and then I can use my liquid glue to put this in place, and then we can take a look at this up close. This will be adhered to a white A2 size card base. And I love that it has all this glitter and shine. I love the embossing glaze, of course the embossing powder, but look at the fun detail that we added just using that Emboss It pen. So I think it's a fun way to add embossing powder to your images in a very different way. And I think this card turned out so lovely. Thank you guys so very much for stopping by and watching. I hope that you enjoyed this project. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and thanks again.